my God! What is happening?
We need to run!
I have found the reason of drowning the whole city.
On the burning sun of ancient Egypt, a city rose where the Nile opened its arms to the sea. It was called Thonis by the Egyptians, Heracleion by the Greeks. At its peak, this place was more than stone and water. It was life itself. Ships with sails like wings drifted towards harbors, their hulls heavy with treasures from faraway lands. Merchants shouted in the markets. Priests raised their voices in temples, and colossal statues of the gods stood as silent guardians. It rivaled Alexandria in beauty and power, a beacon that pulled the eyes of the ancient world. But as quickly as it rose, it vanished. No storm was recorded. No war was declared. No message carried news of fire or destruction. It was there one evening, its towers glowing red with the last light of sun, and by dawn it was gone, a city erased in a single night. Silence remained where laughter had echoed, where prayers had once reached the skies. The waters closed over it, and the earth swallowed its memory. The question that lingers is the one that chills the soul. How can a city filled with thousands of lives vanish without a trace? Imagine the harbor just before the fall. The moon reflects on the water. Fishermen mend their nets, and the scent of incense curls from temple doors. A young boy carries figs through a crowded street. A priest prepares an offering to gods, and sailors tie their ships along the docks. All seems calm. Nothing points toward disaster. Yet this very moment becomes their last. Some say the ground itself trembled. Some claim the sea turned black, pulling ships down as if unseen hands dragged them into the abyss. Others whisper that the gods themselves demanded silence, punishing the city for secrets that should never have been revealed. But in truth, no witness lived to tell. Only fragments of legend remain. The city's disappearance is not just a story of ruins. It is a riddle left for generations. How could temples as massive as mountains vanish beneath the waves? How could colossal statues, carved from blocks of stone so heavy no man could move them, sink into the dark with no one watching? The mystery burns in the mind because such power cannot vanish without reason. The world above carried on. Pharaohs rose and fell. Rome spread across the earth, and new cities grew on new maps. Yet in the waters near the Nile Delta, sailors told uneasy tales. They spoke of lights flickering under the surface, as if torches still burned beneath the sea. Nets returned torn, as if brushed by something vast. At times, shadows seemed to move where shadows should not exist. Fear spread among fishermen, and they avoided that stretch of sea. Generations later, storytellers kept the legend alive. Some describe Heracleion as cursed. Others called it sacred, a place hidden by the gods themselves. Parents frightened their children with warnings of wandering too close to the shore, where whispers might rise from the waves. The legend refused to die. Historians searched for answers. Scrolls from Greece mentioned the city. Herodotus wrote of it, describing shrines where great sacrifices were made to Heracles. Ancient texts recorded its name as if it were fact, yet no ground showed proof. For centuries, Heracleion existed in the same place as myths, between truth and imagination. Still, the mystery refused to fade. Think of the weight of an entire city disappearing. Imagine if New York or London were to vanish overnight, leaving only the ripple of waves. The fear would be unbearable, the silence unbearable. That was Heracleion. For 1,000 years, its silence pressed against human memory. What happened to those people who walked its streets? Were they swallowed alive? Were they dragged to the bottom in their sleep? Did mothers cry out for their children as walls cracked and waters burst through? Or did it all happen too fast, leaving no time for even a scream? These questions linger, unanswered, gnawing at the mind with each retelling. The disappearance was more than a tragedy. It was a wound carved into history. If a city that powerful could vanish, what safety does any city hold? If stone temples can crumble without cause, what hope remains for fragile homes of wood and clay? The mystery of Heracleion does not only belong to Egypt. It belongs to every listener who has ever feared the ground shifting beneath their feet. The truth is that cities do not vanish alone. They leave behind echoes. They leave behind energy. Some say the ruins hum with sound, as if the walls remember. Some divers claim to feel watched, even when alone. Some stories describe shapes moving just beyond the light, as though the city is not as lifeless as it seems. Thonis-Heracleion was not built in haste. It was raised with precision, with wealth, with divine symbols carved into its stones. Its temples aligned with the stars. Its priests knew rituals that bound men to gods. If it vanished, was it by accident or was it by design? Legends grow in the silence. Some whisper forbidden rites, of doors open between worlds. Others claim the city drowned because its people touched what was not meant for human hands. The Greeks spoke of Heracles, the Egyptians of Osiris and Isis, both gods tied to power, death, and rebirth. Could the city have been more than a home? Could it have been a seal, holding something in place until the day the waters claimed it? As the centuries rolled on, the mystery thickened. Every attempt to explain fell short. Earthquakes, floods, shifting sands, all possible, yet none carried enough weight to answer the full question. Because Heracleion did not simply fall. It vanished. It left no ruins on the shore, no survivors to crawl from sea. It dissolved into the deep like it was never there. This vanishing grips the mind because it feels personal. If an entire city can be lost in silence, then so too can all things we believe are safe. Homes, streets, towers, none immune. The story forces every listener to look around and wonder, could this happen again? Picture once more the city in its final hours. A priest raises a torch in the temple of Ammonius. The torchlight dances across golden statues. The crowd outside chants in praise. Ships crowd the harbor. Sails heavy with the night breeze. The moon is high, silver and calm. Then the earth groans. The water shifts. The sound is not of waves, but of something breaking far beneath the surface. Eyes turn upward, searching for a storm that never comes. The last sound many hear is not thunder, but silence, heavy and endless. What swallowed the city? The sea? The earth? The wrath of gods? Or something no human mind dares to name? That question lingers, heavy and sharp. The city is gone, but its story has never drowned. It rises each time the tale is told, each time a listener leans closer, caught between wonder and fear. And as this first part of the story closes, one truth remains. A city that could rival Alexandria, that could house temples like mountains and statues like giants, should not vanish without reason. Yet it did, and no one can say why. So the question that chills every heart is simple. If Heracleion could vanish in silence, what else waits to be lost beneath the waves? The sea has always carried secrets. Some lie deep, buried under layers of water and time. Others rise to the surface, whispering in ways only the most watchful can see. Long after the disappearance of Thonis-Heracleion, the waters of Abu Qir Bay became a place the sailors dreaded. They passed with speed, avoided anchoring, and spoke of strange things that could not be named. To them, the sea was no longer just a body of water. It was alive. It listened, and at night it answered. On dark evenings when the moon was hidden and the waves were restless, sailors swore they saw lights flicker beneath the surface. Not the glow of lanterns, not reflections from stars, but pale, shifting orbs that move with intent. They darted like spirits, vanishing and returning. Too deep for fire and too bright for nature. At first, men tried to explain them as schools of fish, as tricks of the eye. But the more the lights appeared, the less certain those explanations became. One captain whispered that he saw the lights form patterns, as if spelling words no human tongue could read. Another claimed he saw them clustered together, rising until they shaped something almost human, before scattering back into the depths. The fishermen who cast their nets there began to vanish. A boat would leave the harbor at dawn, men laughing, ropes coiled, nets heavy with hope. By dusk, the boat would drift back, empty, its sails torn, its nets shredded. No men aboard, no sign of struggle. Only silence and water dripping from the edges as if the sea itself had swallowed them whole. Some boats never returned at all. Families would wait on the shore for days, watching the horizon, but nothing came. No sails, no wood, not even debris, as though both boat and men had been erased from the world. Whispers spread among the villages along the coast. Some said unseen hands pulled the fishermen down. Others spoke of shadows rising in the shape of arms, dragging the living into the dark. Mothers warned their children never to wander too close to the shore at night. Old men spat into the water to ward off the evil they believed rested below. No one trusted the bay, yet no one could leave it behind. The sea gave life, but here it also took life. The balance was cruel, and it weighed heavy on every heart. Night in Abukir Bay grew heavier with time. Sailors claimed the waves spoke. The wind carried voices, low and mournful, slipping between the creak of ships and the slap of water against wood. Some swore they heard their own names whispered, so faint it chilled the bones. Others claimed the voices were not human at all. They were too deep, too old, like the sound of stone grinding in the abyss. A warning, or perhaps a call. For centuries, the legend of the drowned city fed these fears. People said Thonis-Heracleion had not simply sunk. It had been cursed. Its people had angered the gods. Perhaps Osiris, perhaps Isis, perhaps something older, and the sea had claimed it as punishment. What was drowned once, they said, must stay drowned. Anyone who disturbed the waters was trespassing on a grave guarded not by silence, but by something that never forgot. Every light beneath the waves, every whisper in the night, every vanished fisherman was a reminder of that curse. Yet some began to wonder if the truth was worse. The gods punished men, yes, but what if the city had fallen for another reason? What if the temples of Thonis had not only worshipped, but imprisoned? Some stories spoke of rituals, of doors hidden beneath the earth and waters, of powers not meant for human eyes. If the city drowned, was it to punish the people or to bury something deeper? Sailors felt this truth in their bones. The lights under the water were not only a warning, they were a sign of stirring, of something restless in the black depths. In the coastal taverns, old sailors shared their tales. One claimed that while anchored off the bay, he saw a pale hand press against the underside of the waves, fingers stretching as if pressing through glass. Another swore his ship was dragged several yards in silence, as if ropes unseen pulled it toward the center of the bay. A few even whispered of shapes that swam just below the surface, vast and smooth, larger than any creature known, circling the ships before vanishing without trace. When questioned, these sailors lowered their voices. They did not want to be called mad, yet the look in their eyes told a terror too deep to fake. The fear spread beyond sailors. Villagers swore the sea crept closer in the night, washing further up the shore than it should, leaving behind strange patterns in the sand. Some said they saw wet footprints that led inland but never returned. Cattle refused a drink from the water. Dogs howled toward the sea and would not sleep. It seemed the whole coast lived in the grip of a presence unseen, a weight pressing down, as though the sea itself was watching. Priests tried to soothe the people. They brought offerings to shore, casting flowers, oils, and prayers into the waves. Yet even these offerings sometimes returned, drifting back to land the next morning, wet and torn. It was as if the sea rejected them, as if it no longer listened to prayer. Faith itself began to tremble, and in its place grew fear. The mystery only deepened when storms passed. Normally, after a storm, the waters clear and wreckage rises to the surface. But in Abukir Bay, no matter how violent the storm, nothing rose. Instead, the waters grew darker, as if the depths had swallowed everything tighter. Sometimes, faint sounds carried on the wind after a storm. Not thunder, not waves, but deep echoes like drums beating far beneath the sea. Listeners felt those sounds in their chests, heavy, slow, ancient. Not music, warning. The forbidden currents earned their name not from legend alone, but from experience. Ships that tried to pass too close to the drowned city found themselves caught. The waters pulled harder than any tide, dragging vessels toward the center of the bay. Some captains swore the currents shifted without reason, as though hands of water reached for them. Sails tore, anchors snapped, and only luck or desperate skill saved the ships from sinking. Those who survived swore never to sail that path again. Fear turned into a law unspoken. Sail around the bay. Do not stop. Do not look into the water. Do not listen at night. These rules passed through generations, binding coastal people with invisible chains. Yet still curiosity burned, because in the heart of every man is the pull of the unknown, and the bay, for all its danger, held a mystery no one could ignore. Stories rose of men who dared the waters at night, searching for treasure from the drowned city. They returned pale, shaking, their eyes hollow. Some never spoke again. Others muttered of visions, of entire streets beneath the water, lit by lights no fire could make. They spoke of statues moving, of temples intact, of doors standing in the deep as if waiting to be opened. Their voices cracked with fear, and though they tried to forget, they never lived the same again. The sea holds memory. Every wave that rolls over Abu Qir Bay seems to carry the echo of a vanished city. The silence there is not empty but full of questions, full of warnings. Each ripple whispers of something buried, something that stirs when men grow too bold. The lights, the currents, the vanishing, all point not only to a curse but to a truth much darker. Was Thonis-Heracleion destroyed because its people defied the gods, or was it drowned to hide something that should never be found? The whispers of the bay do not answer. They only remind, again and again, that the sea keeps what it claims, and that what lies beneath does not sleep. The waters of Abu Qir Bay remain restless, as though the drowned city is not finished with its story. Ships still pass in silence. Fishermen still avoid its heart, and the legend endures, growing stronger with every generation, because the sea remembers, and it will never let mankind forget. The desert does not forget. What the sea buries, the sand whispers. And for centuries after the fall of Thonis-Heracleion, whispers continue to surface in fragments, etched into stone, hidden in scrolls, carried in the quiet hands of history. Long before machines and divers searched the bay, it was words that kept the drowned city alive. Words written by Greek travelers, Egyptian priests, and those who feared the truth more than they desired to share it. Archaeologists, drawn by curiosity and obsession, began to gather those fragments. They were not neat records. They were half sentences on cracked tablets, faded ink on torn papyrus, inscriptions half erased by time. Yet in these broken pieces, a shape began to form. They spoke a city of wealth, yes, but also of reverence. A city where kings knelt, where merchants gave thanks, and where Cleopatra herself once prayed in secret chambers. Not only a port of power, but a place of devotion, a place tied to the gods more tightly than any other. The deeper these scholars dug, the more their excitement grew. At first, they expected tales of trade, of harbors, of ships heavy with grain and gold. Instead, they found prayers written in trembling hand, descriptions of rituals performed not for fortune or safety, but for protection from something unnamed. One papyrus spoke of doors sealed in shadow. Another mentioned forces not of this world, bound by chains of water and stone. These were not the voices of men describing a thriving port. They were voices of men who feared what their city was built upon. Each new fragment pulled the archaeologists deeper into the mystery. In Greece, they uncovered passages from Herodotus describing shrines where sacrifices to Heracles were made. But next to those shrines, Egyptian records spoke of sacrifices not to gods of Olympus but to gods of death and rebirth. The blending of Greek and Egyptian traditions was strange, yet it carried a deeper weight. When two great cultures ride the same city, not with pride but with unease, the story becomes more than history. It becomes a warning. Among the finds was a curious tablet, cracked and worn, written in a mix of Greek and Egyptian. It told of a queen who walked through the temple halls, her steps echoing in silence. Some believed this queen was Cleopatra herself. It described how she offered jewels and wine, not to celebrate her rule, but to plead for peace. Peace not with men, but with the sea. The words hinted that even Cleopatra feared the power resting in that city. For a woman who faced armies and conquered hearts, to fear the sea and its hidden depths reveals a terror unlike any other. As the archaeologists compared their findings, patterns emerged. Mentions of a binding, of ritual performed at the new moon, of priests who wore masks of silver and gold. descriptions of chambers hidden beneath temples, where chants rose in the dark, where offerings of blood and incense were burned to seal something away. Some texts even describe an oath that the city itself stood as a guardian, built not just for trade but as a lock, a weight to hold back what waited beneath. The more these fragments surfaced, the less the city felt like a port of fortune. Instead, it felt like a prophecy carved in stone. A prophecy not of greatness, but of disaster. It was as though the ancients themselves left a trail of warnings, hoping future eyes might read and understand. Yet the warnings were written in riddles. They never named the force they feared. They only described it with words that slipped through meaning. The restless, the eternal breath, the shadow without form. What these words meant no one could say, but their repetition across centuries and languages gave them weight. Something was there, something unspoken. Archaeologists are seekers of truth, yet even they felt the weight of fear in these discoveries. Some wrote in their journals that the text seemed less like history and more like whispers left them alone. At night, reading by lantern, they imagined voices in the desert wind, carrying echoes of drowned priests, reminding them that knowledge can be dangerous. The line between research and obsession blurred. To search for a lost city is one thing. To search for a prophecy is another. And this prophecy, carved in sand and stone, seemed to resist being uncovered. One discovery unsettled them more than all the others. A wall inscription, pulled from ruins inland, described a great ceremony held in Thonis-Heracleion. It spoke of torches carried through the city, of thousands gathered at the temple, of priests chanting as the sea roared beyond the walls. The words ended with a phrase translated as, "The seal is set." No mention of what was sealed, no explanation, just those 4 words, heavy and final. The seal is set. To the archaeologists, it sounded less like worship and more like containment. These findings stirred debate. Some scholars argued it was all metaphor. The Egyptians often spoke in symbols, and perhaps the forces not of this world were simply storms or the Nile's floods given form by myth. Others disagreed. They pointed to the careful detail of the writings, the repeated mention of rituals, the consistency across sources. Too many voices, too many warnings. Myths may shift with time, but this fear remained constant. If it was only metaphor, why would so many hands write with such unease? Why would they speak of chains, of seals, of doors? Even the sands of Egypt seemed to echo with mystery. In some sites, archaeologists uncovered artifacts with strange carvings, circles intersecting, lines twisting into patterns not common to Egyptian art. These symbols appeared again in Greek fragments, drawn in margins, almost hidden. Some believed they were marks of protection, signs meant to ward off danger. Others thought they were instructions, maps of something buried. Yet their meaning remained just out of reach. Like whispers carried on the wind, they teased but never revealed. The deeper they searched, the more the city of Thonis-Heracleion became less of a lost jewel and more of a living puzzle. Each piece of text was an echo of fear, of reverence, of secrets locked beneath stone and sea. The echoes did not fade with time. They grew louder, as if the sands themselves wanted the story told. But in telling, they also warned. Knowledge brings power, but some power is not meant to be touched. One cannot help but imagine the people who wrote those words. The priests chanting by firelight, the scribes scratching ink with trembling hands, the sailors whispering of lights beneath the waves. All of them knew something. All of them carried a weight heavier than gold. And all of them chose to pass that weight forward, not with answers, but with warnings. Perhaps they believed no one should know the full truth. Perhaps they feared that if the truth was spoken clearly, it would awaken again. And so the archaeologists stood in the desert, holding fragments of a drowned city, unsure whether they sought history or prophecy. Every step into the past seemed to pull them closer to something that resisted being found. The sands gave pieces, but never the whole. The more they uncovered, the more it felt as though the city itself was watching, waiting, whispering through time. A city both revered and feared, both holy and cursed. A city that did not vanish only by water, but by design. The echoes in the sand remind us that history is never silent. It lingers, calling, warning, daring us to listen. And when the echoes grow too loud, one begins to wonder, are we uncovering the past, or is the past uncovering us? The day began with calm water and a pale sun rising over the horizon. A team of divers prepared themselves on the deck of a ship anchored above Abukir Bay. Their mission was not ordinary. They were not chasing treasure for wealth or pearls for beauty. They were searching for the city spoken of in whispers, Thonis-Heracleion. For years the sea had hidden it, but hints from the sands and shadows from the depths had brought them here. They adjusted their gear in silence, each man and woman aware that once they descended, they would be stepping into history or into something far stranger. The water welcomed them with a cold embrace. Masks tightened, oxygen hissed, and they dropped one by one into the deep. At first, the sea seemed gentle, the sunlight cutting down in pale streams. But with every foot they sank, the light dimmed. Visibility shrank until only the beams from their torches cut through the gloom. What had been blue turned green, then gray, then black. A diver once described it as falling into the mouth of the earth. Endless, silent, heavy, the seabed revealed itself like a graveyard. The first shapes to emerge were statues, faces worn and broken, eyes gouged by time. Some lay half buried in the sand. Others stood upright but tilted, as if trying to rise again. Limbs shattered, torsos cracked, yet the aura of grandeur clung to them still. Gods carved in stone, now prisoners of the sea. The divers moved slowly, the beams of light brushing across hieroglyphs no hand had touched in centuries. The silence pressed on them, broken only by the sound of their breath echoing inside their masks. Further along, the ruins grew denser. Fallen columns stretched across the seabed like bones of a giant beast. Temples lay toppled, their roofs collapsed, their doors sealed by layers of silt. Jewelry glittered faintly in the sand, pieces scattered like remnants of a feast abandoned in haste. Coins, rings, broken chains, fragile echoes of a city that once shone. Yet here they rested untouched, as if waiting to be noticed. The divers picked them up, brushing away the sand, only to place them back. Something about these objects did not invite possession. They felt less like treasures and more like offerings left in a forgotten tomb. The further they swam, the more the ruins seemed alive. Strange currents stirred the sand, curling around their legs, pulling at their lights. At times, it felt as though the water itself was guiding them. The divers did not speak, but each felt it. The sea was not just holding the ruins. It was breathing. With every push and pull of the tide, the city seemed to exhale, the sand shifting in rhythm, the broken walls groaning faintly as though sighing in sleep. Then it happened. One diver, moving close to the temple wall, froze. Through the heavy silence came a sound. At first, faint, almost like the vibration of the earth itself. A low hum, deep and steady, pulsing through the water. It was not the sound of machinery, nor the echo of current. It was more primal, more unsettling. The diver pressed a hand to the wall and felt it vibrate. The stone itself was carrying the sound. It was as though the ruins were alive, as though the city beneath the sea had a heartbeat. He signaled to the others, who gathered near. They, too, felt it. Each diver pressed their gloved hands to the stone, and each felt the same rhythm, slow, heavy, unnatural. The hum was not random. It was steady, constant, as if it had never stopped since the day the city fell. A vibration so deep it seemed to crawl inside their chests, sinking with their own heartbeats until it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. For the first time, unease crept into their minds. This was no ordinary excavation. They were not exploring ruins. They were standing inside something that still lived. The team pushed deeper. The light from their torches flickered against walls that still bore carvings. Strange symbols spiraled across the stone, etched with care, yet now glowing faintly in the beam of their lights. Not paint, not gold, just the stone itself, holding a sheen that shimmered like it remembered fire. The hum grew louder here, almost a chant, almost a voice. Some divers swore they heard words in the vibration, ancient words. They shook their heads to banish the thought, but the sound clung to their minds like shadows cling to light. They entered a structure. Its roof collapsed, but its pillars still rising like teeth from the seabed. Inside, statues loomed over them, cracked but not fallen. Their eyes, though chipped and blind, seemed to follow the divers as they moved. One statue, a massive figure of Osiris, bore strange marks along its chest. At first, they looked like cracks, but when the torchlight slid over them, they glowed faintly, like veins of fire trapped in stone. A diver drifted closer, his hand reaching out, but he pulled back at once. The hum intensified around that statue, the water trembling with the weight of it. It was as if the city itself was warning them not to touch. The seabed stretched beyond, filled with more debris, but also with order. The divers realized the ruins were not scattered randomly. They formed a pattern, as though the city had been designed to circle around something central, something hidden. The fallen temples pointed inward. The statues faced inward. The roads, though broken, still curved toward center. And in that center, the hum grew strongest. The divers felt drawn toward it, as though carried by invisible currents, as though every stone in the city whispered, "Come closer." The jewelry scattered like bones, the coins glinting, the broken walls, all seemed to lead to this place. The divers swam slowly, their lights trembling in the shifting water. The seabed dipped, forming a basin where sand swirled in constant circles. No current stirred it, yet the sand never settled. In its heart stood a single block of stone, vast, rectangular, its surface etched with deep carvings. The hum thundered through it, resonating so strongly that the divers felt their masts vibrate. It was not a ruin. It was not debris. It was something placed, something sacred or something imprisoned. None dared touch it. They circled it in silence, their eyes wide, their hearts racing. It felt less like discovery and more like intrusion. The stone breathed, or perhaps it made them believe it breathed. Each pulse of the hum felt alive, aware. The divers shone their lights over its carvings, only to find symbols repeating again and again. Circles within circles, lines like chains, stars joined by arcs. Warnings, perhaps, or bindings. The water around the stone shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from it. Yet it was the coldest water they had ever felt. One diver swore he saw the sand move as though something beneath shifted. Another thought he saw light flicker from cracks in the stone, a faint glow leaking like blood from a wound. Their breaths quickened, bubbles rising fast, masks fogging. Fear, silent, unspoken, wrapped itself around the group. They were trained to face danger, but this was different. This was not danger. This was presence, the sense that something vast and old had turned its gaze upon them. Even from beneath stone and sea, they drifted back, reluctant to leave yet desperate to escape the weight pressing on their chests. The hum followed, pulsing to the water, softer but still there, like a memory that would never fade. The ruins stretched around them once more, statues broken, temples fallen, treasures lost. But now, they no longer looked like ruins. They looked like warnings. Warnings carved in stone, drowned in silence, guarded by water for centuries. The divers rose toward the surface, the darkness thinning, the light of the sun slowly breaking to the green haze. Yet each carried the same thought. They had not simply explored a lost city. They had entered something alive, something waiting, something that had been silent for centuries, but was now stirring with their presence. The sea held its breath as they broke the surface. And below, the hum continued, steady, patient, eternal. Not ruins, not memory, but an awakening. The seabed stretched out like a dark plain, broken only by ruins and shadows. The divers moved carefully through the silence, their lights brushing against scattered stones, fallen walls, and fractured columns. Every direction seemed to carry echoes of a city once alive. Yet as they swam further, something immense revealed itself ahead, half buried in the sand. Its shape so vast it seemed to rise from the seabed like a mountain. At first, they thought it was part of a temple wall, but as their light swept across its surface, the outline of a face appeared, stone lips cracked and worn, a nose, chipped but still proud, and eyes carved with such precision that even in ruin they seemed aware. It was not a wall. It was a statue, colossal in scale, far greater than any they had seen. A goddess, face pressed into the sand, body broken yet still whole enough to recognize. The crown and form left little doubt. It was Isis, mother of magic, protector of the dead, guardian of mysteries. The divers circled her slowly, their lights running over the details. Her arms stretched outward, as though shielding something invisible. Her body lay heavy in the sand, the weight of centuries pressing her deeper. Yet even broken, she commanded awe. The ocean had not erased her presence. If anything, it had deepened it. Her stone eyes, though cast down, shimmered faintly in the beams of light, as though reflecting more than what was around them. A strange unease crept into the hearts of the divers. They felt the gaze, even though they knew it was only carved rock. It was as though Isis herself watched through the mask of stone, still guarding her secrets beneath the sea. Not far from her rested another giant, a statue even more imposing, though lying face down in the opposite direction. This one bore the crown of a god, tall and unmistakable. Osiris, lord of the afterlife, ruler of eternity. His massive shoulders sprawled across the sand, his torso cracked by time. The divers swept their lights over his form, and a hush settled over them. For here, the stone did not seem lifeless. Along the god's chest and arms ran lines, faint but visible, cracks that pulsed with something almost alive. They glowed faintly, a shimmer like veins carrying light instead of blood. The divers hovered near, their breaths quickening. Was this simple erosion, minerals catching the light of their torches? Or was it something deeper? The glow was not random. It spread in patterns, curving like rivers, pulsing faintly with the water's rhythm. It looked less like damage and more like veins, veins carved into the god of death himself. Fear pressed close now, quiet but heavy. The divers exchanged looks but did not speak. Even through the silence of their masks, their unease was clear. The statues felt less like ruins and more like guardians. Colossal watchers placed a guard the city's heart. Their size alone was overwhelming. But their presence carried something greater, as if the gods themselves had sunk with the city and remained here half alive, still watching. The divers circled Osiris with care. The glow seemed to grow stronger when their light struck it. At moments, it appeared to pulse, a faint rhythm in time with the low hum that had haunted the ruins. The hum, still present in the water, seemed louder here, stronger. It vibrated through their bones, carrying through their chests, sinking with the strange veins of light etched across the statue. They placed their hands on the stone, only to pull back instantly. The surface was cold, but it carried vibration. A deep, steady tremor, like the beat of something buried yet awake. It was then that a feeling overwhelmed them, the sense of being watched. Not by each other, not by shadows in the water, but by the statues themselves. The stone eyes of Isis, the glowing veins of Osiris, together form a weight that pressed against the divers. They could not shake the thought that these were not simple monuments. They were guardians, colossal keepers of something too dangerous to be left unguarded. One diver shone a light into the broken crown of Isis. For an instant, the beam caught on something deep within the stone, a faint shimmer. He blinked, leaned closer, but it vanished. Another swept her torch along Osiris's side and saw markings, half erased by sand, that looked like chains etched into the stone, chains stretching outward, as though the statues themselves were bound to something greater. The silence became suffocating. The hum rattled their bones. The glow burned in their eyes, and the sensation of being observed wrapped around them like chains of water. Some swore they saw the sand shift beneath the statues, as if something stirred far below, a shadow, vast and shapeless, lingering beneath the guardians. Others thought they heard faint sounds, not the hum, but whispers, voices weaving through water, words too ancient to understand. The divers dared not linger. They circled once more, their lights brushing over every crack, every shimmer, every detail of the colossal guardians. And the more they looked, the more they realized these statues were not lying at random. They faced inward, toward the center of the drowned city. Both Isis and Osiris, protectors of life and death, lay fallen yet aligned, their massive forms pointing toward the place the divers had not yet reached. It was as if even in ruin, they continued to serve their purpose, directing the living toward a truth no one was meant to disturb. The statues seemed to wait, their stone lips pressed in silence, their eyes cold yet alive. The glow along Osiris's body pulsed once more, faint and steady, not bright enough to light the sea, but strong enough to burn into memory. The divers pulled back, their hearts pounding, unable to shake the feeling that the city itself had awoken to their presence. The colossal guardians did not move. They did not speak, yet their silence screamed louder than any voice. For in the eyes of stone and the veins of light, the divers knew one truth. These were not ruins to be studied. They were warnings to be obeyed. And still, the divers pressed on, because the city of Thonis-Heracleion was not finished revealing what it held, and the guardians, broken and eternal, would not stop them. They would only watch forever. The ruins of Thonis-Heracleion stretched like a dream across the seabed, a labyrinth of fallen columns, shattered statues, and fragments of walls etched with the memory of a vanished people. Yet in the very heart of this drowned city stood something different, something untouched by time's full ruin. A massive structure, larger than any the divers had seen before, its dark silhouette rising to the murk like a mountain in the deep. It was not broken into scattered pieces. It remained whole, though worn and buried in sand. Its walls still stood tall, its roof still arched, its pillars still lined in solemn order. A temple. The divers swam closer, their lights trembling against its face. Carvings covered the stone from base to crown. Unlike the other ruins, these markings were not faded beyond recognition. They remained sharp, as though the sea itself had preserved them. Shapes of men, animals, stars, and moons wound across the walls in endless patterns. At its entrance, two massive pillars stood guard, carved with figures of Khonsu, the moon god. His head, crowned with a crescent, shone faintly under the divers' lights. His eyes, though only stone, seemed alive, gazing out into the eternal night of the deep. The team entered slowly. The water inside the temple was colder, heavier, as if even the sea hesitated here. Their lights revealed vast halls, their ceilings high, their walls echoing with the weight of silence. Hieroglyphs wrapped around every surface, not telling of trade or festivals, but of rituals, prayers, and warnings. Some figures showed priests raising torches toward the heavens. Others showed moons drawn in cycles, waxing and waning. But deeper inside, the carvings shifted. The walls began to speak of things strange. A door beneath the waters, etched in careful symbols. Figures of priests surrounding it, their hands raised in reverence and fear. Lines of text describing chants to bind. Chains drawn not of iron, but of light. And stranger still, figures that were not human, their forms tall and narrow, their heads unlike any beast known, their eyes shaped like endless stars. The words written beneath them were chilling. Visitors from the stars. The divers hovered in silence, their beams crossing over the carvings again and again. Were these myths, stories told by ancient minds to explain the unexplainable? Or were they records, fragment of memory etched in stone, warnings for those who might come after? The thought pressed heavy, for if these were myths, they were too precise, too deliberate. The door beneath the waters, the ceiling rituals, the visitors, all spoke not of imagination, but of an event remembered. In the central chamber, the floor rose into a platform. Upon it stood an altar, still intact, though draped in centuries of silt. Around the altar, the walls told one long story, carved in sequence like a forgotten book. It showed the city above the water, ships crowded in its harbor, people gathered in prayer. Then came a night when the sky burned with light, lines of fire falling to the earth. Figures of the visitors descended, their forms etched like shadows of men, yet not men. The priests gathered, the moon above them, Khonsu carved larger than all others, his arms outstretched as if commanding both heaven and earth. The carvings showed rituals, sacrifices, and chains of light falling into the waters. Finally, the last images showed the city drowning, waves covering its temples, and beneath the waves a door sealed, guarded by gods and time. The divers studied in awe, their hearts pounding against the silence. Was this the truth of Thonis-Heracleion's fall? Not storm, not earthquake, not wrath of Nile or sea, but a deliberate act, a sealing, a drowning by design, to bury something that came from beyond. The Temple of Khonsu was not merely a place of worship. It was a vault of memory, a warning carved in stone and sealed beneath the waters. And still, the temple lived. The hum that haunted the ruins pulsed stronger here. It filled the chamber, vibrating through the divers' bones, crawling through the very walls. Their lights flickered against the carvings, making the figures seem to move, as though the priests still chanted, as though the visitors still watched from their star-shaped eyes. At times, one diver swore he saw faint glows and cracks of the altar. Another claimed the symbols on the walls shimmered, as if responding to their presence. The temple pressed on their minds. It felt less like a ruin and more like a being. The carvings were not history. They were instructions, warnings, or perhaps prophecies yet unfulfilled. The phrase repeated in hieroglyphs burned in memory. A door beneath the waters. Again and again, the words appeared, etched deep in the others, as though meant to outlast even time. What was the door? Where was it placed? And what lay behind it? The divers swam deeper into the inner halls. Narrow corridors stretched outward, their walls pressed close, their ceilings low. Here, the carvings changed again. They no longer showed people or gods. They showed stars. Endless stars drawn in strange patterns, unlike constellations known to men. Some patterns resembled spirals, other shapes that bent unnaturally, impossible to trace. Beneath the stars, circles of light were carved, layered upon each other like gates. At the center of one circle lay a symbol unlike any seen before, half moon, half eye, surrounded by lines that seemed to move even in stone. The symbol repeated itself across the walls, as if it were the key, the seal, the very heart of the temple's warning. The divers turned their lights, their hands trembling against the stone. These were not simple myths. This was not art for beauty. This was memory or a message left for those who would find it. The ancients had seen something that did not belong to the Nile, nor to the desert, nor to the earth. And they had built a temple not only to worship, but to imprison. The presence of Khonsu as the moon god now carried greater meaning. The moon, always tied to cycles, time, light, and shadow. Perhaps the ancients believed the moon itself was tied to these visitors. Or perhaps Khonsu was a guardian chosen to watch over the sealed door. Every carving of him in the temple showed him not only as protector, but as jailer. His crescent crown glowed under their lights, as if mocking their questions. The team swam back toward the central chamber, the hum louder than ever. The altar loomed, the carvings stared, the shadows moved. A sense of unease wrapped itself around them. This was not discovery. This was intrusion. The temple had not been waiting for them. It had been warning them to turn back. Yet here they were, standing where perhaps no human had stood for 2,000 years, reading words not meant to be read, awakening echoes not meant to be heard. The drowned city had revealed its heart, and its heart was not gold or jewels. It was shadow. It was silence wrapped around truth. A temple to the moon god, a vault for rituals, a book of stars written on walls of stone, a warning of a door beneath the waters, and of visitors from the stars who once walked among men. The divers drifted in silence, the hum thrumming through their bodies, the hieroglyphs glowing faintly in the trembling light. Their eyes lingered on the carvings, on the chains of light, on the door sealed beneath the waves. And though none of them spoke, each felt the same truth pressing in their hearts. The city had not drowned by accident. It had been drowned to keep something hidden, something that still lingered in the depths, sealed, waiting. And the Temple of Shadows was the only reminder left. The first artifacts rose from the water in silence. Bronze coins, shattered amulets, fragments of gold leaf clinging to stone, all pulled from the depths with careful hands. The divers, their hearts still restless from the strange hum of the ruins, handed their findings to the team above. Each discovery was cataloged, brushed, photographed, studied. To anyone else, it would have looked like the triumph of science. But to those who stood on the deck, there was something different in the air. The sea did not give freely. It demanded, and what it gave back that day carried more than history. It carried a warning. At first, it was the machines. Equipment that had worked without flaw for years began to fail. Cameras flickered, their screens filling with static. Recording devices shut down mid-sentence. Computers froze without reason, their data erased in moments. Even the ship's engine sputtered and fell silent at times, as though the power itself was being drained. Electric hums rose and fell, out of rhythm, echoing faintly with the same pulse the divers had felt below. Engineers checked every wire, every circuit, but nothing explained the failures. The sea seemed to reach up, twisting the very tools meant to uncover its secrets. Then came the dreams. Divers who had spent hours in the temple began to wake in the night with wide eyes and shaking hands. They spoke of visions, endless corridors filled with water, doors sealed by chains of light, shadows standing at the edge of their sight. Some swore they saw the colossal faces of Isis and Osiris staring down at them in the dark, their stone lips whispering without sound. Others described hands pressing against the inside of their masks, though no one was near them. The line between dream and waking blurred. A few men refused to dive again, their fear too deep to overcome. But the sea was not finished. Strange accidents began to occur. One diver vanished into the water during a routine descent. His rope snapped, his light disappeared, and though the team searched for hours, no trace of him was ever found. Another diver returned pale and trembling, his words broken, his eyes unfocused. He claimed something brushed against him in the dark. Something large, something cold, something that pulled but then let go, as if tasting before deciding. He left the expedition the next day, unable to speak of what he had felt. The pattern was clear, though no one wanted to admit it. Every artifact pulled from the ruins brought more weight, more misfortune. A necklace of gold lifted from the sand seemed to shimmer unnaturally, its chain unbroken despite centuries beneath salt and stone. That night, the diver who found it swore he heard whispers outside his cabin, whispering his name in a language he did not know. He returned the necklace to the sea the next morning. The whispers stopped. The legends resurfaced quickly. People spoke of the curse of the pharaohs, the ancient belief that disturbing the dead invited death in return. But this curse was different. This was not about tombs or bodies. There were no sarcophagi here, no mummies wrapped in linen. What was buried in Thonis-Heracleion was not flesh. It was something older, something heavier. It was not the wrath of kings. It was the wrath of silence itself. Whispers spread among the crew. Some believed the artifacts were never meant to leave the water. They were anchors, pieces of a chain holding something down. By removing them, the team was breaking the seal. Others argued that the curse was not punishment but protection, meant to keep men safe from what slept below. Either way, fear tightened around the ship like a storm. The divers began to lose themselves. One man stared at the sea for hours, refusing to blink, claiming he saw figures walking along the seabed as though the city still lived. Another swam too far from the group, chasing a light that only he could see. When they pulled him back, he fought like a man possessed, shouting in words that made no sense. He calmed only when they restrained him, his eyes rolling back, his lips muttering a chant no one recognized. He left the expedition shortly after, his mind shattered by something only he had seen. The more the team searched, the stronger the curse grew. Storms gathered out of season, waves rose higher than expected, and the sea seemed to push back against their efforts. Nets tangled without cause. Anchors slipped free as though lifted by unseen hands. Even birds avoided the area, circling wide before vanishing into the horizon. The world itself seemed to whisper, "Leave," and still they continued. The promise of history, the thrill of discovery, the obsession with truth drove them deeper. But each step forward seemed to erase one more member of their number. A diver disappeared. A machine failed. A man lost his mind. The curse was not a sudden blow. It was slow, patient, and relentless, like water carving stone. Some scholars on board tried to explain it. They argued that pressure, darkness, and exhaustion played tricks on the mind, that the hum was natural, a resonance of stone underwater, that the glowing veins on Osiris were minerals reflecting light. But even their voices trembled as they spoke. For none could explain the feeling of being watched, the whispers in dreams, the vanishing men. Science could measure, but it could not comfort. The curse of the pharaohs had always been told as a story of tombs, curses written on walls, promising death to intruders. But here, the curse was alive. It breathed through the ruins. It whispered through the sea. It pressed into the hearts of those who dared to look too close. This was not the wrath of kings guarding their rest. This was the wrath of something ancient, something sealed, something that wanted to remain hidden. One night, as the ship rocked gently on the water, a diver who had grown pale with fear stepped to the edge of the deck. He gazed down into the black waves, muttering that the city was calling him back. Before anyone could stop him, he slipped into the water, vanishing without sound. His body was never found. Some said he drowned. Others believed he was taken. The expedition grew smaller with each passing day. Some left willingly, unable to bear the weight of silence. Others vanished, claimed by the sea. The artifacts that had once filled the crew with joy now sat in crates that no one dared open. Each piece seemed to carry the hum, faint and steady, as though the city still breathed through them. The curse of Thonis-Heracleion was not the curse of tombs. It was not bound to names or kings. It was bound to the act of disturbance itself. The city had been drowned for a reason, sealed beneath the waves by hands that knew what they were doing. To break that seal was to awaken something that had been forced into silence. And silence does not forgive. The sea gave warnings. Machines failed, men vanished, whispers grew louder. Yet the hunger for truth burned brighter than fear. The team pressed forward, unable to stop, unable to turn away, caught in the same net that had ensnared the city's people centuries before. And so the curse lived on, not as superstition, but as presence, a presence that watched from the dark, that whispered in dreams, that reached up from the seabed with unseen hands. A curse that was not legend, but truth, the curse of something that should never have been found. The sea had grown quiet after the last expedition. Too quiet. The ship that once carried divers and machines returned half empty. Its decks stripped of laughter. Its rooms heavy with silence. What was left were fragments, crates of artifacts, half-broken cameras, damned journals with words smeared by salt. The survivors spoke little. Their voices hollow, their eyes restless. Some refused to speak at all. And so the task fell to another, a lone investigator, drawn not by greed or glory, but by the need to understand. He began with the journals. Torn pages, water-stained ink, words broken mid-sentence. Yet within the chaos, a pattern emerged. Men wrote of lights flickering in the depths, of statues that seemed alive, of temples filled with carvings that spoke of visitors from beyond. They described whispers at night, machines that failed, shadows pressing close. Some passages carried raw fear, words scratched as though written in haste, as though the writer expected to be silenced before finishing. One phrase returned again and again, in different hands, at different times. It should not be opened. The investigators studied the broken cameras next. Most reels were empty, filled only with static, but a few carried fragments, images blurred by water, frames interrupted by sudden darkness. In one, a diver's light brushed across the face of a colossal statue. The eyes glowed faintly, though no light source touched them. In another, the ground itself seemed to shift, sand swirling not with current but as though stirred from beneath. One reel ended with a sudden shake, the camera tilting violently, then static. Whatever happened next was never recorded. Logs from the ship painted the rest. Times when equipment failed without reason. Nights when divers woke screaming. Notes of men vanishing into the sea without trace. One log recorded a storm, though weather reports showed clear skies that night. Another noted the hum, described as constant, steady, alive. The words written around it grew erratic, the handwriting frantic, as if the writer's mind broke under its weight. The investigator pieced these fragments together with patience. Slowly, a theory formed. The city had not fallen by chance. It was not swallowed by the Nile, nor shattered by the earth, nor drowned by the wrath of the gods. It had been sacrificed, drowned by design, its temples and statues not only places of worship, but seals. Chains carved in stone, rituals carved in memory, a metropolis turned into a prison. The temple of Khonsu, the colossal guardians of Isis and Osiris, the altar with symbols of stars and doors, all pointed to one truth. The ancients had buried something. Not treasure, not kings, but a presence. Something vast, something not of this world. The visitors described in hieroglyphs were not myths. They were warnings. And the drowning of Thonis-Heracleion was not tragedy. It was necessity, an entire city given to the sea to keep the rest of the world safe. The thought pressed hard on the investigator's mind. If this was true, then the curse that haunted the divers was no superstition. It was defense. Every vanished man, every broken machine, every whispered voice, all were part of the seal, warning intruders away. The city was not lost. It was guarding. He read further into the journals. One diver described seeing a stone block in the base of the city, carved with chains and glowing faintly. Another swore he heard voices rising from beneath it, chanting in languages long dead. A third claimed the hum came from the block itself, as though it was alive. Their words, fractured but urgent, carried one message. The seal is weakening. The investigator felt his heart tighten. If the city was drowned to bury something, and if the seal was weakening, then the question was not about history. It was about the present. Was it still in prison? Or had the divers disturbed it enough to stir? He returned to the artifacts. Coins, amulets, fragments of jewelry. Harmless to the eye, yet each seemed to carry weight. Some glinted unnaturally under the light, their surfaces marked with symbols too strange to be decoration. One amulet bore a carving of an eye within a crescent, the same symbol repeated on the walls of a temple. Another fragment of stone held lines carved in spirals, almost like chains. The investigator ran his fingers across them and felt unease rise. These were not ornaments. They were keys or perhaps locks, once part of the seal now broken. The journal spoke of nightmares. Divers dreaming of the city alive, its streets glowing with fire, its people chanting beneath the moon. Dreams of the sea opening like a door, light pouring out and something stepping through. The same dream, written by different hands, days apart. No coincidence, no illusion, a memory, perhaps pressed into the minds of those who came too close. The investigator compared the dreams with the carvings of the temple. They matched. The fire in the sky, the visitors descending, the chains of light, the drowning. The dreams were not madness. They were echoes. The city itself was whispering into the minds of those who dared touch it. The drowned city had memory, and it did not want to be forgotten. With each piece, the theory sharpened. Thonis-Heracleion was sacrificed to bury a presence that came from beyond. The curse that followed intruders was not revenge, but warning. And the artifacts, taken from the seabed, weakened the seal. Already the hum had grown stronger. Already the divers had vanished. The city had begun to stir. The investigators' thoughts turned cold. If the ancients drowned an entire city to keep this force imprisoned, what would happen if the seal broke? Could a handful of modern men resist what once required a metropolis to bury? The weight of history pressed on him, heavy as the sea itself. He wondered whether the true curse was not the wrath of gods, but the truth itself. The truth that mankind is fragile, and the universe is not empty. In the silence of his study, the investigator laid out the artifacts, the journals, the reels. Together they formed a story more terrifying than any legend. A story of sacrifice, of chains, of silence buried beneath the sea. And though he was only one man, he knew the weight of that story was heavier than any treasure. For it asked a question no one wished to answer. If the city was drowned to imprison something, then is it still imprisoned? Or have the whispers, the lights, the vanishings already answered? The investigator closed the last journal, his hand trembling. The sea, endless and silent, stretched in his mind. Somewhere beneath it, the hum continued, patient, eternal, alive. It began without warning. The sea, calm for centuries, stirred as if waking from a long dream. At first, it was only a faint tremor felt in the decks of ships anchored above Abu Qir Bay, a vibration so small that most dismissed it as nothing more than shifting tides. But soon the tremor grew. The water rippled unnaturally, rolling in circles that no wind or current could explain. Beneath the surface, the seabed shifted, sending clouds of silt spiraling into the dark. Something deep below was moving. Divers were the first to feel it. As they descended into the depths, The familiar silence of the ruins was broken. The seabed groaned. Stones trembled. Columns leaned as if pushed from within. And then, from the cracks in the sand, light began to seep. Not the golden glint of treasure, not the faint shimmer of reflected lamps, but a light too bright, too pure, too alive. It burned like fire beneath water, impossible, unnatural. It spread along the fissures like veins glow in the dark, branching outward to the ruins of temples and walls. The divers froze, their hearts pounding as their lights caught on the cracks, splitting wider. The earth itself was breaking open, releasing something long trapped. The glow pulsed in rhythm, not random, but steady. A beat, slow and heavy, as if the seabed itself had a heart. Each pulse carried through the water, pressing into their bodies, rattling their bones. It was not just sound. It was presence. A presence older than the city that drowned, older than the sea that buried it. On the surface, the bay boiled. Fishermen stared wide-eyed as the water lifted and fell in unnatural swells. Birds screamed overhead, circling in panic before vanishing into the horizon. The tremors shook through the ships, rattling metal, snapping ropes. Some claimed they heard the sound rising from below, even above the waves. A deep resonance, too vast to belong to man, too ancient to belong to earth. It was the kind of sound that did not enter the ears but crawled into the mind. A sound that made even the bravest grip the rails with trembling hands. The ruins below were no longer ruins. They stirred with life. Statues once silent now reflected a strange glow, their eyes burning in the dark. The colossal figures of Isis and Osiris seemed to tremble, their stone bodies cracking further as light crawled along their veins. The temple of shadows pulsed with brilliance, the carvings of chains and stars flickering as if alive, as though the walls themselves were remembering the night of sacrifice. The hum, once faint, became thunder. It shook the divers' masks, rattled their teeth, pressed against their chests until breath itself felt stolen. They clutched their ears, though it made no difference. The sound was not carried by water alone. It rose from the deep and pressed into their very minds. A chorus of voices that were not voices, words that could not be understood, yet were felt, words that spoke not to the ear but to the soul. The fissures widened. Sand burst upward in violent clouds. From beneath the seabed came flashes of light, blinding and raw, like lightning caged under the sea. They tore through the darkness, illuminating the drowned city in terrible brilliance. For moments at a time, the ruins looked alive again. Temples lit as though torches still burned within. Streets glowing as if filled with the footsteps of thousands. The city returned not in stone, but in memory, in light. In echoes of the night, it was given to the sea. Divers cried out, their voices lost in bubbles, their hearts racing with fear and awe. Some swore they saw figures standing in the ruins, silhouettes tall and alien, their forms outlined in the blinding glow. Others swore they felt hands brush against them, cold and endless, guiding or warning. They could not tell. One diver dropped his light and fled upward, his body shaking as if the sea itself had entered his lungs. The fissures split further, releasing streams of heat into the water. The sea grew warm, then hot, boiling in patches that shimmered with strange colors. Greens, blues, purples no eye had seen in nature spread to the currents, wrapping the ruins in a spectral glow. The smell of sulfur rose even to the surface, and the water bubbled as though alive. Yet through it all, the hum grew louder. Louder until it was not hum, but chant. Louder until the entire bay seemed to vibrate with it. On land, villagers along the coast awoke in the night to find their homes trembling. Windows rattled, lamps flickered. The ground shivered as though beneath them a giant stirred. Those brave enough to look toward the bay saw the waters glowing faintly, pulsing like the breath of some vast beast. Mothers held their children close. Old men whispered prayers long forgotten. Dogs howled toward the horizon. The curse of the pharaohs was no longer a story. It was alive, reaching through earth and sea to remind the living of what had been buried. The investigator, poring over journals and broken reels, knew at once what it meant. The sacrifice of Thonis-Heracleion had never been permanent. It was not destruction. It was delay. The city had been drowned not to erase, but to hold back. A prison sealed by stone, sand, and ritual. And now the prison was breaking. The sound that rose was not random. It carried intent. It spoke of awakening. It carried the weight of ages, the memory of chains snapping, the hunger of something long denied. Those who heard could not explain it, yet each understood. It was not myth. It was not legend. It was countdown. The bay convulsed with another tremor. Waves struck against the shore, higher than any tide. Ships rocked violently, anchors tearing loose. Lights flickered beneath the surface like stars drowned in the dark. Some grew so bright they reached the surface, glowing like lanterns trapped in a glass, burning before fading into the abyss again. Fishermen fled their boats, diving into the water to swim for shore, their hearts too shaken to remain. And deep below, the cracks spread like a web. The stone block in the basin, etched with chains, split down the center. From a fracture poured light, so fierce it blinded the divers. They shielded their eyes, but the glow pierced through their masks, searing their mind with visions of fire in the skies, of visitors descending, of the drowning of the city, of the chance that sealed them below. They saw the priests crying out, the people running, the sea swallowing all. They saw the seal close, and they felt it now breaking. The divers fled, their bodies trembling. But even as they rose, they felt it follow. The hum, the light, the presence pressing against their minds. They surfaced gasping, their cries filling the air. On deck, their eyes shone with fear, their lips mumbling words they had never known before, ancient names carried up from the deep. The awakening had begun. The prison that once demanded a city's sacrifice was breaking open. And with each tremor, each flicker of light, each pulse of sound, the truth grew clear. The curse was not a tale told to frighten children. It was a promise written in stone, in blood, in silence. A promise that what was once buried would rise again. And now the sea itself carried that truth, shaking the earth, boiling the water, filling every heart that listened with dread. Something below was stirring, something older than civilization, something never meant to see the light of day again. The awakening below was no longer prophecy. It was present, and the world above could feel it in every trembling wave. The sea raged like a living thing. Waves rose and fell with unnatural fury, their foam glowing faintly as if touched by hidden fire. The air above Abakir Bay trembled with a strange vibration, a deep sound that carried not only through water, but through earth and bone. Those who stood on the shore felt it in their chests, a steady rhythm like the heartbeat of the drowned city itself. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The divers clung to their ropes, their eyes wide behind their masks. The seabed split further beneath them, light bleeding through the cracks in sharp bursts, brighter than any lamp, brighter than any torch. It pulsed in steady waves, each one stronger than the last, until even the colossal ruins were bathed in its glow. Statues half buried for centuries seemed to rise in defiance. Isis and Osiris, guardians of the deep, appeared to lift themselves from the sand, their stone forms glowing with veins of light. Their faces, broken yet eternal, looked less like ruins and more like watchers. The investigator, piecing to the journals and reels, realized with horror that this was the end of the seal. The drowned city had been sacrificed once before to bury what should never rise. But now, the chains carved into stone, the chants etched into walls, the rituals written in hieroglyphs were breaking. The hum that had haunted divers was no longer a warning. It was a voice that rose with every crack, every tremor, every pulse of light. The ship above rocked violently, its ropes snapping, its deck groaning as waves slammed against its sides. Crew members scrambled to hold it steady, but even the sea itself seemed intent on pulling them toward the heart of the bay. Nets tore loose, anchors failed, and still the glow from below grew brighter, piercing the water like a beacon from another world. Some swore they saw shapes moving within it, shadows tall and thin, their forms bending in ways no human body could. Others swore they heard chants rising, words older than language itself, filling the air without sound. The colossal statues shifted again, cracks deepened across Osiris's chest, glowing like rivers of fire. Isis's arms, outstretched in stone, seemed to tremble with the force of the light. The divers could not escape the sense that these guardians were not simply statues. They were seals themselves, carved not to honor, but to bind. And now, even they struggled against the weight of awakening. The ground shook harder. Sand burst upward in clouds that blinded the divers, their beams of light scattering wildly. For moments at a time, the drowned city looked alive again. Streets glowed, temples shimmered, and the great altar in the temple of Khonsu pulsed with unbearable brilliance. It was as though time itself folded, showing glimpses of the night the city fell. Men running, priests chanting, the sea swallowing all. The sacrifice of thousands replayed not in sound but in vision. The divers felt themselves pulled into that memory, as if the city was demanding they witness what had been done. The investigator's theory burned clear in his mind. Thonis-Heracleion had never been lost by chance. It was drowned on purpose, drowned to keep the world safe from what it once touched. And now, with every artifact removed, with every seal disturbed, the prison was failing. The hum was no longer distant. It was here, pressing into the ears, the mind, the soul. It was no longer warning. It was invitation. The bay boiled harder. Fishermen on the shore fell to their knees, their eyes fixed on the glowing water. Children cried out, clutching at their parents, while old men whispered prayers into the wind. The glow lit the night sky, turning darkness into pale silver. Birds circled overhead, screaming as though they too felt the weight of what was stirring below. Dogs barked, cattle fled, and the earth itself groaned as though the bones of the world were cracking. Still, the sea did not give its full secret. The cracks widened, the light blazed, the sound thundered, but nothing emerged. It was as if the city itself was caught between worlds, struggling to decide whether to rise or remain buried. The statues glowed brighter, their eyes seeming alive, their faces fixed in eternal defiance. Perhaps they resisted still. Perhaps they guarded even in ruin. The divers rose toward the surface, their bodies trembling, their hearts racing with fear. Their voices broke the air as they gasped for breath, their words frantic, their minds haunted by visions. They spoke of doors opening beneath the waves, of chains snapping, of something vast pressing against the cracks. They spoke of a presence too large a mind to hold, a presence that filled the water, the earth, the sky. The investigator watched with dread as the journals came to life before his eyes. Every phrase, every warning, every whisper etched in stone had come true. The drowned city was no ruin. It was a lock, and now the lock was breaking. He asked himself the only question left. Was the seal strong enough to hold again, or had the time of silence ended? The sea raged on, boiling, trembling, shining with unnatural fire. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stilled. The tremors ceased. The waves lowered. The glow dimmed until only darkness remained. The hum faded into silence. The city below returned to shadow. The water lay calm, as if nothing had happened. But those who witnessed it knew better. The silence that followed was not peace. It was pause. A pause heavy with meaning, like the breath drawn before a word. The drowned city had stirred. The prison had cracked. And whether it had closed again or simply waited, no one could say. The colossal statues lay silent once more, their veins dark, their eyes cold. Yet the memory of their glow haunted every diver, every sailor, every villager who stood on the shore that night. For they knew they had seen something greater than myth, something deeper than legend. They had seen the truth of Thonis-Heracleion. The last tide had risen, and it had shown the world that the sea keeps what it claims, but not forever. Now the story of the drowned city belongs not only to the past, it belongs to the present, and perhaps to the future. Because what was buried once can stir again. What was sealed once can break. And the silence of the bay carries the weight of that secret still. If you felt the pulse of this story, if the mystery of the drowned city held you until the very last tide, then let the tale live beyond this moment. Share it so others may wonder. Subscribe so you do not miss the story still waiting beneath earth and sea. And like this story, so it may echo, carried further, remembered longer. For legends breathe only when they are told, and some legends refuse to stay silent.